Well, firstly, let me thank you for your time and congratulate the Bulan Institute on the great work that you're doing. And looking forward to working with you here in Geneva soon, I hope. As you say, the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, GCERF for short, was established in 2014. So still quite a new and young fund, with a very specific initiative to try to provide funding to local communities to build resilience against the risk of violent extremism. So it's about small grants at the local level to try to make people more aware, to allow people to mobilise, to allow people to find alternatives to the risk of violent extremism. We have 14 government donors at the moment, that's 13 countries plus the European Union. We've raised around $50 million, which I think is a good start for a fund. We also have in-kind contributions from the private sector and from foundations as well. So I'm very pleased that we've begun to raise money, we've begun to raise our reputation in this area. Most importantly for me, we are now making grants. So for the last year, we've been providing grants in Bangladesh, Kenya, Kosovo, Mali, Nigeria, soon Tunisia as well. We think we're reaching over 1 million people at the very local level, and I think we're beginning to demonstrate that we're making a difference. Now, you asked about some of the challenges. Now, there are many challenges, of course, of firstly raising money, and that's as a fund we have to continue to raise money and attract funds. I'm very pleased that we're raising money from development actors as well as security actors. We sit somewhere between development and security. Of course, reaching local communities is difficult. You have to have a mechanism that allows you to get money to local communities in a trustworthy, efficient, sustainable way, and we have to do that. Perhaps the biggest challenge, of course, is demonstrating results. We're a young fund, we're doing something that's difficult. As you can imagine, preventing violent extremism as a long-term goal. Prevention is very difficult. Prevention is, of course, the counterfactual. The success of prevention is that nothing at all happens, which isn't a very exciting outcome. Absolutely. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment about really demonstrating that the money we're spending at the local level is beginning to make a difference. Just to clarify, none of the money from GCERF goes to governments. All of our money goes to local communities. So we clearly don't fund governments, we only fund communities and local NGOs and community-based organisations. Equally, we think it's important that we always work with the governments in the countries where we're providing grants. This is a politically sensitive issue. We're a global fund, we're a multilateral instrument. So it's important that we work with governments, that governments understand what we're doing, that we're not working off the radar screen or behind the scenes. So we work with governments, governments invite us into their countries, but we're very clear, none of our money goes to governments, and governments have an input but not a veto over where the funding goes. So there have been examples where we've wanted to fund communities where sometimes the government isn't happy or isn't comfortable, and we've made the argument that we have a mechanism, that we have a governing board, that we've made a sensible, reasoned, objective decision, and every time that's happened, the government has accepted our recommendation and allowed us to work. So we have to navigate, of course, local politics, government priorities, but so far we've been very successful in reaching local communities. The other point to make about GCERF that I think really is the added value is that because of our neutrality, we're a Swiss foundation, we're a non-profit foundation, we don't wave a particular national flag, we have 14 donors. That means we can reach communities that sometimes bilateral donors can't reach. It may be that there are communities out there that don't trust the UK or Canada or Australia or France or the US and so on and so forth. It may be that those donors find it hard to manage very small grants. It may be that there's a lack of confidence between some recipients and donors. The point of GCERF is to allow bilateral donors to reach communities where sometimes it's hard for them to reach them by themselves. If you look at the recent Global Terrorism Index, which was published a few months ago, and it's an annual publication that I think is very valuable and the main data source on terrorism, that indicates that there's a good news story, that the number of deaths and injuries as a result of terrorism has decreased over the last year, that the amount of money lost to the global economy has decreased over the last year. So there's a good positive trend, but I think everybody that I know warns against complacency. There are still some concerns. Boko Haram is still, we think, active in certain parts of the Sahel. ISIS certainly is losing considerable ground in Syria and Iraq, but still has pockets of influence. There's concerns that Al-Qaeda may be reforming and regrouping in other parts of the world, for example, the the Philippines. We have the risk of returning foreign fighters who may be so-called lone wolves or coming back to societies and perhaps have been indoctrinated. So there's a positive trend, but we must guard against complacency. I would argue that part of guarding against complacency is to focus on prevention. Now, clearly we need a comprehensive approach. Clearly you need security responses. Clearly you need military responses and police responses. Clearly you need border control and migration policies and so on and so forth. But equally, I think you need to work in communities with people at risk to try to make sure that those people make a positive decision rather than going down the wrong route. So prevention is part of making sure that we can secure the gains that we've made over the last year and trying to make this a positive trend going forward as well. You're absolutely right, and this is of course the majority of deaths and injuries and economic losses are still in poorer countries, but this is absolutely an issue of rich countries as well, whether Switzerland, where we're sitting now, or the UK or the US, and so on and so forth. What I've learned in my years working with GCERF is that the drivers of radicalization to violent extremism are very context specific. Some people might say it's about religion, and I can take you to people who have no religious belief but are still perpetrating violent extremism. Some people might say it's about Islam. I can take you to places in the world where Buddhists are committing violent extremism. Some people might say it's about poverty. I can take you to middle-class students in Bangladesh who have committed crimes in Dhaka and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's just poverty. Poverty may be one of a range of factors. They coalesce in particular contexts, in particular settings. If you ask me to generalize, I think there's something around disenfranchisement, around marginalization, around frustration. Those are the things that seem to be driving people to radicalization, and it may or may not be associated with poverty, but certainly there's something around marginalization, around frustration, around a feeling that you have no hope, you have no future, the government can't provide any options, and so perhaps you decide to take another option. I don't. And as you know, before my life with GCERF, I worked on refugees and migration for a long time. It's clear to me that the main association between displacement and displaced populations and violent extremism is that displaced people are fleeing violent extremism and not coming to our societies to perpetrate violent extremism. That's the obvious link. People who are leaving Syria or Iraq or other parts of the world are fleeing terrorism or the threat of terrorism. That's the clear message. However, I think we should have a sensible debate. I think we should be open and honest. There are clearly risks that on occasion, some people arriving in our societies may be arriving with ill intentions, whether that's to commit crimes or to take advantage of social welfare or perhaps to perpetrate terrorist attacks. I'm very clear, and I think the evidence is very clear, that the majority of attacks in terrorism and violent extremism are perpetrated by nationals of countries and not migrants to those countries. So let's have the debate, let's be honest, let's be open. Now and again, there are examples of migrants and asylum seekers and even refugees perpetrating terrorism, and we shouldn't deny that. But absolutely, there's no case that migration or asylum or refugee poses a security risk to our societies. On the contrary, I think the evidence is clear that migration and indeed asylum and refugees can benefit our societies and economies in the long term. So a careful debate, and I think really disassociating the risks of migration with violent extremism and terrorism. I'm very pleased you use the word stereotype, because it is a stereotype and it's a shocking stereotype. I mean, it is quite clear to you and to me and to anyone of any religion that the vast majority of Muslims, as Christians and Jews and Buddhists, are peace-loving people who follow the rules of their book and follow the idea of peace. Clearly, some people in some contexts may become angry, violent, extremist and terrorists. There's a terrible misperception that there is a direct link between Islam and violent extremism and terrorism, and the evidence clearly does not bear that out. Most of the victims of violent extremism are Muslim, rather than the perpetrators being Muslim. And I think we really need to think about how we as a Western society in particular can correct this really rather threatening misassociation. I was in Saudi Arabia yesterday. I came back just this morning, which is why I'm a little tired. And the misrepresentation of Saudi Arabia, I think, is striking. I had very positive meetings with the government, with various centres there, who are really doing very hard work to counter, to prevent anti-extremism. I think doing some very innovative work indeed. These are societies of people who want to make a difference, who want to correct misperceptions of their religion, and want to make it very clear that Islam is not about violent extremism or terrorism. The answer is, I think, better education. The answer is, I think, more responsible media coverage. I think, if I may, at times, some of the Muslim societies in our countries don't do themselves favours. I think perhaps they should think about integrating a bit more effectively, about being a little bit more open, about being a little bit less mysterious. So, I mean, I wouldn't want to apportion blame unfairly. I think we all have to make an effort. Integration is a two-way street. The government has to make an effort, the local population has to make an effort, and migrants have to make an effort as well. And I think if all of us can make an effort, can educate our children, can really understand what the challenges are, then I think we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your insightful answers. And you're right that when you say education is the key, that's why Bulan Institute, we are working in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan with madrasas.
Absolutely.
And advocating for the improvement of the conditions and curriculum of madrasas. Dr. Koser, thank you very much for the interview, and I'm sure we will meet again. And all the best.
Thank you, and well done on your very excellent work with the Bulan Institute. I look forward to working with you going forward. Thank you for your time.